It's 1969 at Dusty Speedway in Northern California, where the music was loud, the drugs were stronger, and where the dream of peace and love was to reign. But something else came calling, and what began as a free concert meant to unite a generation became a rolling nightmare of violence, paranoia, and death beneath the roar of amplified guitars. Let's return to the darkness surrounding Altamont here on Things Visible and Invisible. Joel Selvin is a music journalist, critic and author, best known for covering rock music and pop culture for many years at the San Francisco Chronicle. A long-time voice in music journalism, he has written extensively about rock music, legendary musicians and the darker side of the music industry, including Altamont, the Rolling Stones, the Hells Angels and the inside story of rock's darkest day. And he joins me down the line from his home in California. Joel, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
Sean, great to be here.
Joel, I'm sure you've been asked this question many times, being a rock journalist of many decades, but was Altamont really the final hurrah for the 1960s, the full stop, the moment when everybody realized that peace and love was not quite as it seemed?
Well, I don't know about the moment where peace and love went down the toilet, but it was December 1969, Sean. I mean, the 60s were over in a matter of days. But if you're talking about the 60s and that sort of aura of change and upheaval that I think you were when you call the 60s. I mean, that's what sort of the code word for the 60s. I don't really feel like that ended in 1969 at Altamont. Altamont wasn't really the end of anything. It wasn't the end of the Rolling Stones. It wasn't the end of the Grateful Dead. It wasn't the end of free concerts in the park. To me, the whole 60s thing, whatever that was, kind of petered out after the war in Vietnam was over and the Americans fled Saigon. And that's 1975. But was Altamont a pivot point? Probably. It certainly was a marked point where people went, what was that? And if you ask me, there's an incredible turning point in the work of the Rolling Stones, who had believed in themselves up until then. Their little myth making about painting it black and please allow me to introduce myself, all that stuff, they inhabited that. And then at Altamont, they're confronted with the reality of it. I mean, you've seen the movie, you've seen the fear on Mick Jagger's face as he sees those beasts from the motorcycle gang assessing his, looking him over, and he go, okay, you know? The week before Altamont, the Rolling Stones were in Muscle Shoals Studios, and they recorded 3 songs that would eventually appear on their next album, Sticky Fingers. And that was Brown Sugar, Wild Horses, and You Got to Move. Now, Altamont happens, and they finish Sticky Fingers over in England, mostly at Mick Jagger's country mansion with a remote recording unit. But it's not the same band. It's not. The material is not as fierce. The material is not as convincing. I mean, they have this song on Sticky Fingers called Can't You Hear Me Knockin', which starts out sounding very much like a Rolling Stones song, and then out of nowhere turns into a Santana song, like a frank imitation of Santana. Now, up until that point, the Rolling Stones had never felt it necessary to sound like some other band, but they'd lost their way. And the history of the Rolling Stones after Altamont is them trying to find their way back to where they had been and never really successfully getting there.
Okay, well, that's a good point, Joel, for us to set the scene a little bit, because believe it or not, there will be people watching this who really don't know who the Rolling Stones are or were, and certainly don't know who the Hells Angels were and are and where they came from. So let's start with the Rolling Stones to begin with. Give us a little bit of a potted history of the Rolling Stones up until the beginning of 1969.
Well, of course, the Rolling Stones, at least in America, were second only to the Beatles as the most popular rock band to emerge from the British invasion. They had a string of hit records and were really leaders of the rock movement from 64 on. By 69, the entire rock field had grown so much. And the Stones themselves hadn't been out on the road since 66, when they were doing 25-minute sets on top of a program of 12 different acts and just running through the country, date after date. The art form had changed so much by 1969. And Led Zeppelin was on the road doing a 2.5-hour show with a 20-minute drum solo. The Who were touring with Tommy, doing Tommy live. And the Stones found themselves absolutely broke in a impossible situation with an American manager named Alan Klein, who bottlenecked all their money. Literally, all the money revenues for the Rolling Stones went through his office, and he just stopped paying them. So here they were, completely broke, and they took some advice from a banker who told them that they should start a company to tour the United States and get that money directly. Well, of course, they were a fantastic attraction in 1969. The Beatles weren't touring. The next one down was the Rolling Stones. And they were able to extract 100% of the payment in advance because they couldn't afford to tour the United States unless they were paid in front. Furthermore, they were paid what was at the time a fantastic sum of money. The tickets that went on sale were twice as much as anybody else's tickets. They were $7.50. And it was an outrage to the hippie world where music was supposed to be free. But they needed the money. And they had no idea what they were doing, but off they go to the United States to finish recording their album, Let It Bleed, and do a tour and right their financial wrongs, get some money in the treasure chest. But once they were there, and they sensed how big an opportunity it really was, how exciting the Rolling Stones were turning out to be, then the plan started to scale up. And Jagger wanted to do a movie, a concert movie. They'd missed Woodstock. Woodstock had taken place in August. And I think he wanted sort of a Woodstock of his own to end his movie. But in the meantime, the Grateful Dead had come into their orbit and had suggested doing a free concert at the end of the tour in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And that seemed like a great idea, both in keeping with the spirit of the times, sort of to counterbalance the bad publicity they were getting over these enormous ticket prices, and to provide a big free concert crowd for the finale to this concert movie that was on the boards. All that seemed like a great idea. It went south almost immediately. There was a character in the Stone's entourage. Uh, Later, he turns out to have been working in the witness protection program, and was working for the Stones under an assumed name. But he stepped up and said, "Let me handle this negotiation with the city of San Francisco. I'll call the mayor's office." Well, the Grateful Dead knew what to do about how to get bands in the park. They did it all the time. This guy just stepped up and called the mayor. The mayor was a Republican asshole who hated hippies, and that was the end of the concert ever taking place in Golden Gate Park. And the next morning, Mick Jagger holds a press conference in New York and says, "Well, we're going to have a free concert at the end of the tour. It's going to be on December 6th, and we're not quite sure where, somewhere near San Francisco." Now, the tour ends. The Stones go down to Muscle Shoals to do some recording in Alabama, and they send out an advance crew to San Francisco to work with the Grateful Dead. The concert is to take place on Saturday. On Tuesday, they find a motor raceway about 60 miles north of San Francisco called the Sonoma Motor Raceway. And they go up there and they talk to the people running it, and they say, "Okay, you can do it here." So they start building a stage in Sonoma, bringing up sound equipment, getting the preparations ready. On Wednesday, the Sonoma people communicate with their corporate ownership in Los Angeles, a company called Filmways. Well, Filmways had promoted the Los Angeles concerts by the Rolling Stones at the front of the tour, and they were not happy with their business dealings with the Rolling Stones. So immediately they stepped in, they made some demands. And by the way, they didn't believe the Rolling Stones when they said that any profits were going to a Vietnamese orphans program, which was, the case. It wasn't. They wanted distribution to any movie. They wanted insurance. They wanted, not unreasonable requests, but that was not on the table. So Wednesday, it's over at Sonoma. And Thursday, remember, Saturday's the concert. Thursday afternoon, they're meeting in a San Francisco lawyer's office trying to figure out what are we going to do. And a phone call comes in from a guy named Dick Carter. And Dick Carter has this run-down motor speedway 60 miles east of San Francisco called Altamont. And he's dying out there. He's had the place for a couple of years, and the biggest crowd he's ever had was 5,000 people showed up for a demolition derby once. And he says that they can have the place for free. He just wants the publicity. So now they can't just take him up on it. So they get a traffic helicopter from one of the local radio stations, and they put Rock Scully, the manager of the Grateful Dead, and Michael Lang, one of the producers of the Woodstock Festival, who mysteriously enough has just shown up in San Francisco to see if he can do anything to help sprinkle a little Woodstock fairy dust on it, right? Michael Lang and Rock Scully, they take this helicopter ride, and Rock told me about this. He said they got over the hill and they come down over this barren stretch of remote land, and he sees this racetrack, oil stained, blown out tires, pieces of car parts. It just looks like hell. And he's just like going, wow, whoa, wow, whoa. And he hears Michael Lang say, "Oh, this is perfect. We can do it here." And even Rock was like, well, this guy did Woodstock. He might know what he's talking about. So at 4 o'clock on Thursday, they push the button. They start helicoptering pieces of stage from Sonoma over to Altamont. They go on the radio and they put out a public plea. If you've got a pickup truck and aren't doing anything, go up to Sonoma and help us take gear over to the new concert site for the Rolling Stones concert. And people are still wrapping cables and plugging them in at noon on Saturday when Santana starts the concert.
Okay, just pause there, Joel, because that's set it up really nicely. A couple of things before we get into what happened at the Altamont concert itself. First of all, whose idea was it that the Hells Angels were to be in charge of security?
So the Hells Angels weren't in charge of security. That's such a trope. I went into great detail in my book about the politics inside the Hells Angels organization and what the difference between the San Jose chapter and the San Francisco chapter and the Oakland. And I know what happened. I talked to everybody, but it doesn't matter. Everybody's going to say the Hells Angels acted as security and they are paid $500 worth of beer. Well, that's a bunch of bullshit. Okay. What happened was, you got to remember, this was going to be in San Francisco in Golden Gate Park. So the Rolling Stones representative, Sam Cutler, and the Grateful Dead's manager, Rock Scully, who was well known to the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels San Francisco headquarters was across the street from the Grateful Dead's house at 710 Ashbury in the Haight-Ashbury. So, and they showed up at any outdoor event with their colors on, parked their bikes backstage. They were just part of the scene. At the famous San Francisco Be-In, where the Hells Angels guarded the electrical lines and made sure the sound didn't get unplugged and handled the lost children. The San Francisco chapter was a different animal. Anyway, Cutler and Rock go and meet with a couple of the guys from the San Francisco chapter. You guys are going to come. We know that. We just want to sort of figure out what role you might want to play. Would you like to do security? And Pete Knoll, vice president of the Hells Angels, says, "We're not cops." No. Answer is no. But they would accept hospitality. They would accept backstage access. And thank you very much for inviting us to the party. And Sam Cutler says, "Is there anything else you'd like?" And Pete says, "We like beer." So Sam buys him $500 worth of beer and makes it available as a gesture of hospitality backstage. Now, what happens in front of the stage, because the San Francisco chapter, Golden Gate Park goes out of the picture and the concert moves out of San Francisco. The San Francisco chapter of the Hells Angels loses jurisdiction. And Terry the Tramp, who was a very close friend of the Grateful Dead's, he was Owsley's partner in the LSD business, he warned them. He said, "You get out of San Francisco, we aren't going to be able to control these guys. And we don't have any jurisdiction. So, that's going to be a problem. Not enough of a problem." So we get to Altamont the day of the concert. Those guys in the front of the stage that are so famous with the pool cues and stuff, that's the San Jose chapter of the Hells Angels. And it was 6 months old. It had been formed out of a turf war between the South San Francisco Hells Angels and a rival group called the Gypsy Jokers. The Gypsy Jokers had been vanquished, and the San Jose chapter had been put together by some thugs from South San Francisco and some of the disaffected Gypsy Jokers. And there are a lot of so-called prospects. And prospects are people who want to join the club, and they get a sort of probationary status where they're not members, but they can do what they're told. And they're kind of like indentured servants. Show-offs. Definitely. And those are the guys in front of the stage. San Jose is 60 miles from San Francisco. It's not a hippie territory. It's a car culture territory. People still had grease in their hair in San Jose in '69. So it's an entirely different culture out there. And those were the guys that caused the problems. Those were the guys with the pool cues. Those are the guys who were beating up concert goers. The San Francisco crowd was backstage, and the Oakland chapter didn't even show up until late in the afternoon. And you know from the movie, they just drove their motorcycles through the crowd, parked them in front of the stage, and sat on the stage.
Okay, so that's interesting in itself. Now, the Rolling Stones, you're right. It's December '69. The '69 had been a, shall we say, a very eventful year for the Rolling Stones, to say the least. Not least because of the death of Brian Jones. And then there was the concert here in London, in Hyde Park, in the summer as well. I mean, what was the state of mind that they were in? They were trying to make some money in the US. You've set that out for us, Joel. What was the sort of state within the band at that time? I mean, had they in any way come to terms with the death of Brian Jones?
Oh, I don't think they liked Brian by the time he died. I think they'd had it with him quite substantially. I think he was a bit of an asshole and unhappy and probably mentally ill in some regards. So you know, his death was more of a public problem. He'd already been fired from the band. Uh, so I don't think that was an issue. Uh, and I think that you know, that was a high point of the collaboration between Keith Richards and Mick Jagger. I think they were just chugling along. I mean, Let It Bleed's one of the great albums of all rock music. So they were operating on an incredibly high level. Is Brian even on that record? I think he's like barely on Beggar's Banquet, and then not at all on Let It Bleed. Uh, so no, I think the band was operating within their own framework at a very high level. There was an incredible amount of innocence and arrogance involved in the whole thing. They treated America like they were a pirate ship going around, you know, getting booty and raping wenches. Uh, I've seen the file folder with all their unpaid bills. They literally did not pay hotels, car rental agencies, or travel agencies until they were forced to by lawsuit. And they settled on the courthouse steps in 1976, you know, what, 7 years after incurring the debt. So, I mean, they really were just like pirates, and they were out to make as much boodle as they could. And the ambition that goes with it, you know, the movie and the massive audience for their free concert, all that was like, you know, a product of a dangerous combination of arrogance and ignorance.
What about other things that were swirling around in the background? And I'm wondering how much of this was legend as opposed to anything more. But that the Rolling Stones had, shall we say, dabbled in the occult in many different ways, culminating in songs like Sympathy for the Devil, etc. But there was certainly this allure that they were not just the bad boys of rock. They were also people who had, shall we say, made some sort of deal for their fortune. And Brian Jones, unfortunately, ended up as a sort of victim of that. What do you make of all of that, Joel?
Well, I don't know about that, but I do know that, yes, they had created this illusion of being the dark side of rock and roll, and, you know, Lucifer's friend and all that, and they had inhabited those songs to some degree. Certainly, they were having a lot of bad luck and bringing on a lot of despair in their personal lives, but the fact that they confronted that day at Altamont. So they always said that they didn't know anything about Meredith Hunter being killed, right? You know, he was a young black guy who was literally knifed to death 15 feet in front of the stage while they were playing. And his body was deposited on the lip of the stage right in front of Keith Richards. And if you were to look in my book, there's a photograph, and it shows the Hells Angels, a scrum of Hells Angels, pushing Meredith Hunter's body off the stage, and Mick Jagger looking away and covering his eyes. What could he be not looking at? Oh, yeah, they saw the body come up on stage. And the whole place fell apart. The whole concert fell apart. And they didn't know what to do. They were terrified. Some Hell's Angel put a gun in Keith Richards' side and told him to start playing. Michael Lang wandered out and tried to calm the audience down. Mick's going, brothers and sisters, what are we fighting for? You've never heard Mick Jagger so at a loss, so out of sorts, so completely unconfident. And in the movie, you know, they get a lot of that across, but they don't really have the real life experience for you, because that concert broke down for 25 minutes. And the band just sort of wandered around on stage saying, what do we do? What do we do? And Mick going, sit down. Everybody sit down. Yeah, 350,000 people are going to sit down, Mick. So he says, let's play a blues. He plays an old Jimmy Reed song. Nobody knows it. Nobody cares. Nobody sits down. And so the concert falls apart again. They're trying to figure out what to do. And Mick Taylor, 22 years old, scared to close to pissing in his pants, says to Jagger, why don't we play the new song? And that would be the song they had recorded the previous Tuesday in Muscle Shoals, Brown Sugar. Jagger says, great idea. And he announces to the crowd, we're going to play a song now we've never played before. You're going to love it. It's called Brown Sugar. And for the first time in public, Rolling Stones play Brown Sugar. And everything comes together. The band locks. It starts to work. The crowd's on it. So from that point on, they pick up their set list, which they've practiced on the road now, and they go for another hour to the end of the concert. Now, I've heard the tapes. Bob Matthews was the Grateful Dead's audio guy, and he brought a 16-track recorder out to Altamont to record it. Some of the stuff was used in the movie, but it's the Rolling Stones tape, and Bob's like this very scrupulous steward, and he would only allow me to sit in his living room and listen to it, which I did. And it is a fantastic performance, just fantastic. Charlie and Bill have the rhythm section just locked down tight. And Keith and Mick Taylor, they're like gears locked in together. And Jagger is singing for his life. He's convincing, he's committed, he's earnest, he's sincere. None of that kind of like goofy characterizations that you know, outlandish stuff that he gets into, sort of lampooning his own style. No, man, he's singing for real. And they burn through an hour, same order of the songs that they've always played in. And as soon as they're done with Sympathy for the Devil or Street Fighting Man, they're out of there. They stuff 17 people into a helicopter that's meant for 5 and make it out to San Francisco, and they're gone from America the next morning.
Wow. And the aftermath, Joel, I mean, a lot of recrimination. A lot of people over the years anyway have blamed the Rolling Stones for what happened. You know, the impression given, correct or not, is that Altamont was a sort of badly organized version of Woodstock, which is saying something, and that this kind of fatality was inevitable, but also that somehow the Rolling Stones, this, as you say, this bad luck or whatever it was they were attracting, somehow crystallized on that December night in California.
Well, first of all, let's put Woodstock into a little bit of a different perspective. 4 people died at Woodstock too, you know, and it was supposed to be a ticketed concert, but this unruly mob broke down the fences, turned it into a free concert. The first thing they did was burn down the hot dog stand because they thought the concession prices were too high. They blocked the interstate. Governor Nelson Rockefeller very seriously considered sending in the National Guard And had he done so, the Woodstock story would be quite a bit different. They dodged a bullet there. They were very lucky to get through that thing with with as little problem as they did. Altamont was much worse in terms of being thrown together in the last minutes. The site was not really well thought out. The logistics were non-existent. I mean, Emmett Grogan of the Diggers was one of the original planners of this when it was going to be in Golden Gate Park. And he went down with Rock Scully to Los Angeles to meet with the Stones. And he brought up in front of Jagger about bathrooms and food and water for the crowd. And Jagger simply said, well, we'll worry about that when the time comes. There were 50 porta potties for 350,000 people. You can't imagine how much dung they left in the fields. And there were no security. There was a tiny bit of security force that came with the Stones, maybe 10 people. I don't know. The cops showed up. They didn't know anything about it until it started to happen. And they showed up and went, whoa, and just stood on the hill and watched. They didn't even come to the concert. So, I mean, come on. What do you expect? One guy died when he jumped into a canal and drowned as the canal went underground. Meredith was stomped to death by Hell's Angels, and 2 other people were killed after the concert when some knucklehead stole a car and drove through the crowd and crashed onto a campfire. So, I mean, uh, as public disasters go, it could have been a lot worse. Also, check this out, Sean. Out of those 350,000 people, how many do you think were on drugs? My estimation is 50,000, and probably more. And the quality of the drugs and the nature of the drugs, that's a whole different thing altogether. Because in 1966, when people were taking LSD and going to the Fillmore, that was pretty special era. And there was only a few chemists that were producing LSD. And they were missionaries, they were zealots. They were very concerned about the quality of the product. Now, by 1969, it had passed into the hands of all kinds of unscrupulous people just trying to make money and get drugs sold. And they'd do things like they would add strychnine, yes, the poison strychnine, to their formula because it made the trips last a little longer. They also mixed LSD or mescaline, which was a LSD adjacent psychedelic, with methamphetamine, with speed. And that had a tremendously deleterious effect on people who use that. You see the picture from the movie of that guy walking around naked that the Hells Angels eventually beat the hell out of. Apparently, one of the things, when you take LSD and speed together, the clothes become an encumbrance, and people just routinely take off all their clothes. And there was a lot of that going on. So there was a lot of that. Just the film crew alone, and there were 12 people on the film crew, and 9 to 10 of them were on LSD, and half of those by accident, just glugging the orange juice bottle. So you got 50,000 or more people on psychedelic drugs. You're talking about some kind of mass toxic psychosis.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, not everybody had a bad time at Altamont.
Well, certainly Meredith did. What happened to his murderers?
Well, his name was Alan Pissarro. He was in the San Jose chapter of the Hells Angels. He was eventually arrested and charged with murder, and the prosecution kept showing over and over and over again in courtroom the footage that captured the assault. And it really is very clear. You watch Hunter get smacked around a little, and then he backs up and reaches into his pants and pulls out a gun. And it's so obvious. And before he can do anything with that gun, Alan Pissarro has jumped on his back and stabbed him in the neck. He stabbed him 4 times, took him down to the ground, and then other Hells Angels stomped and stood on Hunter. The gun was taken by one of the Hells Angels. It was turned into the cops weeks later. That's a whole story. And some concert goers managed to get the Angels to get off of Hunter, and 4 of them lifted up his body and carried it up the stage and put it on the stage. The Angels pushed it off the stage, and there was a young intern who had come to the stage because they were calling for a doctor, and he grabbed Hunter's body and took it backstage. He says it must have been all adrenaline. He had no idea he could carry that guy. The head doctor of medicine looked at Hunter, realized his life was in jeopardy, and went to try and find somebody who could give him access to the helicopter so that he could medevac Hunter out of there. And he was told, though, the helicopter is reserved for the Rolling Stones. So Hunter died backstage, and there's a very touching scene in the movie where Hunter's girlfriend is being comforted by a Red Cross worker, and they roll the gurney with Hunter's dead body right past her. And they cut from that shot to looking up underneath a helicopter taking off. And the clear implication is that Hunter's body's on that helicopter. But he never got on a helicopter. His body was taken to the Raceway office, and it sat in Dick Carter's office for hours because the coroner wasn't going to come out and collect it until after all the traffic cleared. Okay? So what that is, that helicopter shot in Altamont, that's a lie.
Mm. And final question, Joel. The Rolling Stones, you've already alluded to it. It was business as usual in the coming years then. They went on to create what they created musically, and the legend continues to this day. In recent times, or even post-Altamont, was there any kind of soul-searching on the behalf of the Rolling Stones about what took place that night?
No, none. They never contacted Hunter's family. They never apologized to anybody. They refused to discuss it publicly. Keith Richards writes it off in his autobiography as being the Grateful Dead's fault, and the Hells Angels, of course. The Hells Angels always get blamed for this. And the Rolling Stones have never accepted any responsibility in any regard. It's entirely on their bill, if you ask me. They were the ones that were heedless, that were arrogant, they were greedy, they were self-serving, and they never gave a moment's thought to safety, to propriety, to common sense. They just moved forward. And you know, the funny thing in researching this, I watched the plans evolve, right? And every time that something was up to luck, they got the bad luck. They got the bad bounce. Nothing went right for them. Nothing. So you'd think, you'd pull up at someone, hey, this isn't going right at some point. But they just powered through until the whole thing was over and the disaster had happened.
Tell people where they can find out more about you and where they can pick up a copy of one of your books, including this extremely important book about Altamont.
Thanks so much. Oh, we want to encourage people to shop at independent bookstores, but there are, major capitalist online centers where books can be ordered and delivered to your door. If you're curious about me, there's a joelselvin.com that'll fill you in. And, it's great to be with you, Sean.
Joel, for now, thank you so much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.